In 1924, the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad loaded 100 sticks of dynamite into one of its own buildings. The company no longer needed it. The tenants had already left. The only thing left to do was bring it down. The windows blew out. The doors blew out. The concrete walls did not move. The company left both the dynamite and the building in the woods outside Nanticoke, Pennsylvania. That building is still there. So are the 19 others beside it. A century of forest has grown up around walls that a formal demolition attempt could not destroy. They are not the only ones. Across America, buildings that outlasted their purpose, their owners, and entire industries are still standing in cities that have been emptying for decades. Not because anyone saved them, because something in the way they were built was stronger than every decision made to end. One was built for 2,500 people. The roof is gone. The stained glass is long removed. The walls are still standing over a Gary, Indiana that has lost more than half its population since the first brick went up. Another provided the steel that went into the Golden Gate Bridge, the George Washington Bridge, and more than 1,000 naval ships in World War II. The blast furnaces that made it ran their last heat in November 1995. They are still standing in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And on certain evenings, a concert is playing in their shadow. 7 buildings, 7 different refusals. Stay until number 1. Because number 1 was the tallest abandoned train station in the world for 30 years. And the company that just spent nearly $1 billion bringing it back is the same company that built the city it was designed to serve. Let's get into it. Number 7. Bannerman's Castle, Polypel Island, Hudson River, New York. 40 miles north of New York City, visible from every Metro North train that runs the Hudson Line, there is a ruined castle on an island in the river. Not a large house, not an ornate estate, a castle with towers, battlements, and walls rising directly from the water. Francis Bannerman VI was a Brooklyn military surplus dealer. By the late 1890s, he had accumulated so much equipment, including virtually the entire captured inventory from the Spanish-American War of 1898, that his Manhattan warehouses were full, and his neighbors had begun raising serious objections about 2 million pounds of ammunition stored in a residential district. In 1900, Bannerman purchased Polypel Island outright and began building a storage complex he chose to design as a Scottish Highland castle. His family was from Scotland. He drew the architectural plans himself. Construction ran from 1901 until his death in 1918. The walls were raised directly from the riverbank using rubble and concrete. At its fullest extent, the complex had towers, an arsenal, a private residence, and Bannerman's own name spelled out in 6-foot letters on the wall facing the river. 2 years after his death, 200 pounds of shells and powder exploded inside the main arsenal. The blast destroyed the storage building and scattered debris across the island. Nobody rebuilt it. The family continued using what remained for several years. A fire gutted the residence in 1967. New York State purchased the island in 1969. The towers are still standing. Trains pass within a few hundred feet, in both directions, every hour. Most passengers have never looked up to ask what it is. Number 6. Concrete City, Nanticoke, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. In 1911, the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad built 20 identical 2-story duplexes for its workers outside Nanticoke in Luzerne County. Everything was poured from reinforced concrete: walls, floors, staircases, window frames. The bathtubs were concrete. The railroad chose the material for its durability, its fire resistance, and its cost over time. There was one thing nobody had fully calculated. Concrete is a terrible material to live in. The walls sweated in summer. They held the cold in winter until the interior matched the exterior temperature. Workers moved out as soon as alternatives were available. By the early 1920s, the duplexes were empty. In 1924, the railroad contracted their demolition. One building was packed with 100 sticks of dynamite and detonated. The windows blew out. The doors blew out. The walls did not move. Not one wall. Not one structural section. The contractor walked away. The railroad walked away. All 20 buildings were left standing, in what eventually became a stand of second-growth forest outside Nanticoke. They are still there. The forest has grown up through the window openings and across the interior floors. Tree roots have split some of the slabs, but the walls that refused 100 sticks of dynamite in 1924 have refused everything a Pennsylvania winter has sent since. The railroad that built them dissolved in 1960 when a merger absorbed it. Concrete City is still standing. The next 3 buildings were not just abandoned. They were the physical record of entire industries. When those industries ended, the buildings had nowhere to go. Number 5. Gary City Methodist Church, Gary, Lake County, Indiana. U.S. Steel built Gary from 9,000 acres of Lake Michigan sand dunes in 1906. Within a generation, it was a city of 100,000 people. The steel mill was the reason. Everything else followed because the mill needed workers, and the workers needed a place to live. In 1926, at the height of that prosperity, the congregation of the City Methodist Church commissioned a building. The architect designed it in late Gothic style. The sanctuary seated 2,500. There was a chapel, a gymnasium, office space, and a tower above the nave that rose 15 stories. The stained glass windows were fabricated specifically for the commission. The building was not designed to last a decade. It was designed to outlast the city. It has. Gary's steel production declined through the 1960s and 1970s. U.S. Steel reduced its workforce systematically. Families moved to the suburbs. And then out of the county entirely. The congregation of City Methodist fell year by year until the church could no longer maintain the building. In 1975, the congregation vacated. The building was stripped. The stained glass was removed before others could take it. The roof held for a decade, then it began to fail. By the 1990s, the nave was open to the sky. The walls are intact. The Gothic arches are intact. The tower is intact. Gary's population in 1926, when the church was built, 100,000. Gary's population today, under 70,000 and still falling. The building was designed to outlast the city. That was never supposed to be a sad thing to say. Number 4. Cary Furnace, Rankin and Swissvale, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. The Homestead Steel Works in the Monongahela Valley was the most productive steel operation in the world for most of the 20th century. Cary Furnaces number 6 and 7 sat on the opposite bank of the river from the main complex, built to produce pig iron and feed it across the water by bridge. At operational peak, the two furnaces produced 1,000 tons of iron per day. The last heat at Cary Furnace ran in 1978. Not because anything broke, because the combination of cheaper ore sources, aging infrastructure, and foreign competition had made them uneconomical to keep running. The main Homestead Works closed 8 years later, in 1986. The plant that Carnegie Steel had built, that the Pinkertons had defended in 1892, that had run through 2 wars, closed with a final heat and a press release. The furnaces, 90 feet of steel and brick, were too expensive and too structurally complex to demolish. They stayed. Today, the Cary Furnace site is managed by the Rivers of Steel National Heritage Area and listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Tours run on weekends. You can stand underneath the same structures that were producing iron in 1943, when American shipyards were building destroyers. They were shut down as uneconomical. They are now considered irreplaceable. The last 2 buildings were built to announce what America was becoming. One of them still is. The other was silent for 30 years. Number 2. Bethlehem Steel Blast Furnaces. Bethlehem, Northampton County, Pennsylvania. Bethlehem Iron was founded in 1857. It became Bethlehem Steel in 1904. For the following century, it was the second largest steel producer in the United States. The steel for the Golden Gate Bridge came from here. The George Washington Bridge. More than 1,000 naval and merchant ships built for the United States in World War II. Chances are, the article said in 1995 that any major bridge you cross or any skyscraper you see has some Bethlehem steel in it. On a Saturday in November 1995, Bethlehem Steel extinguished the last blast furnace at its flagship plant. 1,800 workers were sent home. The operation that had been pouring steel since before the Civil War ran its final heat. The union had made wage concessions through the entire 1980s so the company could modernize. The company used the money to refurbish a plant in Indiana instead. The furnaces, 6 of them, each over 80 feet tall, running the length of several city blocks, were too large and too structurally complex to demolish. Too complex to demolish without a sustained multi-year effort that nobody was prepared to fund. In 2011, Arts Quest opened steel stacks on the site, an outdoor concert amphitheater, a film festival, an arts center. The blast furnaces are the backdrop. They have not been touched since 1995. They are preserved in place as the largest intact example of American steel-era industrial architecture still standing. The Empire State Building has Bethlehem steel in it. Nobody standing inside the Empire State Building thinks about that. Number 1. Michigan Central Station, Detroit, Wayne County, Michigan. Michigan Central Station opened on December 26, 1913. The architects, Warren and Wetmore and Reed and Stem, the same firms that had designed Grand Central Terminal in New York, built it with a 230-foot tower and a waiting room with 60-foot ceilings. At its opening, it was the tallest train station in the world. The approach from Michigan Avenue was designed deliberately so that arriving passengers would see the full height before they entered. The year it opened, Henry Ford introduced the moving assembly line at his Highland Park plant. Detroit in 1913 was building itself faster than almost any other city in the world. Michigan Central Station was built for a city that had not yet reached its projected scale. At 11:30 a.m. on January 5, 1988, train number 353 bound for Chicago pulled out of Michigan Central Station. It was the last train to leave. Amtrak redirected its Detroit service. The station was locked overnight. What followed across the next 30 years is specific and well documented. The copper wiring went first, then the copper fixtures, then the copper frames of the windows themselves. The 60-foot ceilings hosted pigeons. Rain came through the roof. The marble floors were carved up by the shoes of the thousands of people who broke in. Detroit City Council ordered the building demolished in 2009. A lawsuit saved it, citing its status under the National Historic Preservation Act of 1975. More than 1,000 people were arrested inside the building between 1988 and 2018. On June 11, 2018, Ford Motor Company announced its acquisition of Michigan Central Station. The total investment in the station and surrounding campus, $950 million. More than 1,000 people were arrested inside the building between 1988 and 2018. On June 11, 2018, Ford Motor Company announced its acquisition of Michigan Central Station. More than 3,000 tradespeople worked 1.7 million combined hours on the restoration. 29,000 original Gustavino tiles were reinstalled, nearly all of them the same tiles that had been there in 1913. A stonemason spent 428 hours hand-carving a single replacement column capital from a 21,000-pound limestone block. Ford came back in 2018 and spent nearly $1 billion on the building that Detroit had built in 1913 to announce what it was becoming. The building stood for 30 years because it was built to last. And when someone finally came back for it, the structure was still sound. 3,000 tradespeople, 1.7 million hours, the same building. 111 years later, 7 buildings, none of them preserved by coincidence. Each one the product of a decision made by someone long gone, about materials or scale or design, that turned out to be stronger than every subsequent decision to let them end. They did not survive because they were important. They survived because ending them was harder than leaving them. If there is a building in your city that belongs on this list, still standing while everything built around it has been taken down, put it in the comments. See you on the next one.